You're old. It's time to make way for the next generation. It's the way of the world. You would never ask your parents for an old toy.
Mama?
Everyone wants the hot new thing.
Mom and Dad don't even know you. They love me.
Oh yeah? Do the math again. There's only so much love to go around. It's like these beans. You used to have all your parents' love, all their time, all their attention. You had all the beans. But then I came along. Babies take up a lot of time. They need a lot of attention. They get all the love.
We can share.
You obviously didn't go to business school. Look, Templeton, the numbers just don't add up. There's not enough love for the two of us. Not enough beads to go around. And then, all of a sudden, there's no place for Tim. Tim doesn't fit me. Oh, what about Tim? So keep quiet, stay out of my way, or there's gonna be cutbacks.
You can't be fired from your own family.
You can't be fired from your own family, can you? I remember well the day that my sister first came home, and the thought of the additional love in the family turned to the thought that that was the only love in the family. And as I grew older, I began to realize truly I was the one who didn't have any love. It was all for my sister. Anybody with a younger sibling? Right, and of course, younger siblings, you all got to that point where you realize your older sibling had all the love, right? And then we get older, and we have our own children, and we begin to compete for the love of our children, and we compete with our spouse, and we compete with the electronics, and we compete with everything else that's surrounding them, and we say there's not enough love to go around. In fact, most of what goes on in a sad courthouse down the road is all about competing for our children's love and our children's affections. My background, as most of you in here know, is really a background of that kind of competition. And my mother is Jewish, my father is Muslim, and here I am, this Christian evangelist, somehow from this crazy mixed up background. And the background really is always one of love, blessing, affection for me. But there's none for you. See, their background started back in Genesis 15. That's where my family on both sides traces back to. If we turn with me to Genesis 15, 4 through 6. There we go. Then the word of the Lord came to him, "This man will not be your heir, but a son who is your own flesh and blood will be your heir." See, God had promised Abraham an heir. And Abraham was old and had no children. And Abraham said, what's going to happen if I have no children of my own? Well, in the law of the day, that meant that his slaves would be his heirs, and they would inherit. And God took him outside and said, look up at the sky and count the stars. If indeed you can count them. Then he said to him, so shall your offspring be. Abraham believed the Lord, and he credited it to him as righteousness. In other words, God says, that slave that you think is all there is left, that's not it. I have a bigger plan for you. I have a huge blessing. I have a blessing so large, so gigantic, that there's no way that you can possibly imagine it. And God said, then Abraham said, I believe you. And that alone was righteous. But there's a problem. See, if we step back to Genesis 15, 2 through 3, we see the setup. We see the problem that we have. Abram said, Sovereign Lord, what can you give me? I remain childless. The one who will inherit my estate is Eliezer of Damascus? Is a slave? Is it children? Abraham said, you've given me no children. A servant in my household is all that I have as an heir. See, we know God has a huge blessing for us. But we let our own little independent obstacles jump in between us and receiving those blessings because we don't know how that giant blessing that we read about, that we think about, that God promises us, we don't know how it's going to come to us. We think maybe it's not really intended for us. We think there's something in the way, and that was what Abraham had. He saw the human in the way. He saw the world in the way. He saw that there was no route to the blessing that he was being promised. There was a dead end. The dead end was his age. He didn't have an heir, and his wife couldn't have children. So Sarah, his lovely wife, had a solution. And men, our wives, often have solutions. And we often should put our trust in the fact that God speaks to us through our wives. And sometimes not so much. So Sarah, Abraham's wife, had borne him no children. But she had a slave named Hagar. Sarah had a solution that was perfectly fitted with the time period. She had a slave. That slave was her. For all legal intents and purposes, that slave is Sarah. If Abraham has a child with the slave, that's Abraham's heir, that's Sarah's child. They can be truly happy. They can have this blessing through God in a way that the world says is perfectly appropriate. And Hagar is the solution to this problem, this dead end. She's the worldly solution. She's what they believe God has provided as a solution. And this isn't unusual for the time period. This isn't out of the ordinary, even though for us the idea seems somewhat ludicrous. We're looking at the Bible through centuries and millennia back in a different time period, in a different lifestyle. But for that time frame, this is the way to procure an heir if your spouse is not able to give you the heir. This is perfectly legitimate. This makes Hagar part of the family. Genesis 16:2-3. So she said to Abram, "The Lord has kept me from having children. Go, sleep with my slave. Perhaps I can build a family through her." And Abram agreed to what Sarah had said. So after Abram had been living in Canaan 10 years, Sarah, his wife, took her Egyptian slave Hagar and gave her to her husband to be his wife. In the Quran, the Muslim holy book, we have the same story. And in the Quran, we have an emphasis on the fact that this rendered Hagar Abraham's wife. Abraham had not the restrictions we have on numbers of wives. There were no laws set in place that he could only have one. There were no laws set in place that he couldn't marry his wife's slave. In fact, sleeping with her was marriage. So what the Quran institutes there, what it impresses upon us, and although that detail is not emphasized in the Bible, that detail is a fact of the culture. At that point, Abraham and Hagar are legally procreating and creating this heir. And Sarah begins to doubt herself. And she looks and she says, "I've created this heir, but it's not mine." See, God's going to give all these blessings. But now Abraham has this other family. And that's where the blessing is going to go. So we move ahead to Genesis 16:4-5, and we get into Sarah's head. He slept with Hagar and she conceived. But when she knew she was pregnant, she began to despise her mistress. And then Sarah said to Abraham, "You are responsible for the wrong I'm suffering. I put my slave in your arms, and now that she knows she is pregnant, she despises me. May the Lord judge between you and me." He followed his wife's suggestion, and now things have gone a little out of her control. See, she can't have a child, and she wants this blessing. Hagar can and has this child coming, and knows now I've got this blessing in this heir, and And now we've got enmity in the family. We've got Hagar and we've got Sarah, and they're at odds, and they're not happy with each other. And Hagar is going to be mistreating Sarah, and Sarah is going to be completely jealous of Hagar. That's where the error is, and both of them know it. So if we look at Genesis 16:6, she says to him, "Your slave is in your hands." Abraham says to Sarah, "Your slave is in your hands. Do with her whatever you think is best." So Sarah mistreated Hagar, and Hagar fled. Sarah knew there was a blessing, but this blessing had gone out of her control. Hagar knew there was a blessing, and she wanted to hold on to it. And so she began to push back. See, Hagar had blessing. And Sarah believed that meant there was none left for her. But what does God say? If we move just a little bit ahead, Genesis 16:7-10, God has an answer. See, the angel of the Lord found Hagar near a spring in the desert. It was the spring that is beside the road to Shur. And he said, "Hagar, slave of Sarai, where have you come from and where are you going?" She says, "I'm running away from my mistress." And he said, and then the angel of the Lord said to her, "Go back to your mistress and submit to her." See, God had another plan. God had blessing for both. The angel added, "I will increase your descendants so much that they will be too numerous to count." See, we have a blessing that was given to Abraham. You're going to have descendants so numerous to count. You're going to have this blessing so huge that you can't imagine it. And now the angel of the Lord is saying to Hagar, you're having a child, and you're going to have a blessing so huge that you can't count it. And so Hagar comes back and returns home and has her child at home and submits to Sarah. And that could be the end of the story. Blessing for Hagar. Blessing for Abraham. The story's done. But see, God's story is always so much bigger than the story that we imagine. God dreams bigger dreams than we can possibly ever dream. Whenever we look and we say, that's outside of God's hands, it's because we're not looking at God's hands, we're looking at human hands. See, God, if we move to Genesis 17, 1-8. There we go. When Abram was 99 years old, the Lord appeared to him and said, "I am God Almighty. Walk before me faithfully and be blameless. Then I will make my covenant between me and you and will greatly increase your numbers." So Abram fell face down, and God said to him, "As for me, this is my covenant with you. You will be the father of many nations. No longer will you be called Abram. Your name will be Abraham, for I have made you a father of many nations. I will make you very fruitful. I will make nations of you, and kings will come from you. I will establish my covenant as an everlasting covenant between me and you and your descendants after you for the generations to come, to be your God and the God of your descendants after you. The whole land of Canaan, where you now reside as a foreigner, I will give that to you as an everlasting possession to you and your descendants after you, and I will be their God." See, there's a blessing. And Hagar has received a blessing. But that doesn't mean that there isn't some still there. See, that's the image that we're left with. That Hagar has this blessing. And if we stopped, we have a blessing for Hagar and no blessing for Sarah. We have Ishmael founding this nation. But that's not the end of the story for Sarah. See, Sarah is going to have a child as well. She is going to have her own child. In fact, we know the story. The angels come and tell her she's going to have a child. She laughs at them. Right? And so she ends up naming her child Isaac because she laughed when they said, "You're going to have a child." She was 99 years old. There's no way. She's never been able to have children. She couldn't dream of a blessing as big as God had in store for her. But now, we're back to conflict in the house. Hagar is a child and has been promised many nations. Sarah has a child and has been promised many nations. A blessing for one and a blessing for the other. See, in the Muslim view of it, now, I want to step back for a moment. We view today that Ishmael's nations becomes Islam of today. We don't know for sure because there's links that are missing. But we do know that God promised Ishmael a nation. Nations will come from it. And Islam comes out from the Arabic people. So we make an assumption and we make a deduction. Because there isn't another group of nations that continues to exist today that could fulfill that. And we know that the word is absolutely true. So we know there's a nation coming from Ishmael, and that's why we make the assumption and refer to it as Islam being from Ishmael. Another blessed nation from Abraham. Which is very hard for us as we sit here through centuries and through millennia of problems that come from that enmity, from that struggle within that household, from those problems between the two. We look at it and we say, which blessing are we a part of? Are we a part of that blessing of Ishmael? Or are we a part of the blessing through Isaac? See, the Quran, they look at it the opposite of us. They say Ishmael was the only blessing, and then Isaac was illegitimate. And because Ishmael came first, Ishmael's the rightful heir. In fact, in the Quran, when it says, in the message we heard last week, we talked about the binding of Isaac. Pastor Vadim talked about how God told Abraham to take his son, his only son. In Islam, they believe that was Ishmael, because he was the only rightful heir. And of course, we believe that it's Isaac, because he was the only son still there, because what happened next after all of this enmity, after all of these problems within the house? Sarah says, no more. Isaac is the heir. Ishmael must go. Jewish tradition says that Ishmael would attack Isaac so hard he would sit on the top of their dwelling and he would fling arrows at 3-year-old Isaac as he walked out the front door. That there was so much anger between the two. The blessings for me, and there will be nations out of me. The blessings for me, and there will be nations out of me. See, God took what he had, and he made an image so big. So huge. Early the next morning, Abraham took some food and a skin of water and gave them to Hagar. He set them on her shoulders and then sent her off with the boy. She went on her way and wandered in the desert of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she put the boy under one of the bushes. And then she went off and sat down about a bow shot away, for she thought, I cannot watch the boy die. And as she sat there, she began to sob. God heard the boy crying, and the angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, What is the matter, Hagar? Do not be afraid. God has heard the boy crying as he lies there. Lift the boy up, take him by the hand, for I will make him into a great nation. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. So she went and filled the skin with water and gave the boy a drink. God was with the boy as he grew up. He lived in the desert, and he became an archer. While he was living in the desert of Paran, his mother got a wife for him from Egypt. Hagar heard God's voice. Hagar saw God, and Hagar was blessed. And her blessing came through Ishmael, who survives despite Abraham pushing her out into the desert with her son. So this is the same Abraham that finds Isaac in the next chapter. First takes his firstborn and sends him out into the desert. But God promised he would make a nation of that child. God had a blessing. And God wasn't limited by one view of that blessing or by another view of that blessing. God is not limited by our worldly vision of how much blessing there is for you, for me. Sarah was so concerned, she said, I don't want my son to be a co-heir with that slave child. And today, how often do we look at our message and say, I don't want that person to be a co-heir with my blessing? See, this was a concern straight through into the New Testament. If we look at Acts 15, the entire church was divided by whether Gentiles could truly be co-heirs with Jews, if Gentiles and Jews could both receive the message, or if you had to be Jewish to get the message of Jesus. Right? In Ephesians 3, Paul tells us, I was sent to the Gentiles so that they can be co-heirs with you. And that was radical. If we look at Romans 11, it says the Jews turned away because they didn't want to be co-heirs with the Gentiles. And Paul's fervent hope was seeing the blessing given to the Gentiles would bring the Jews home. See, God has so much blessing that he wants to pour it out on every single person. But we want to hold it for ourselves. We don't want to share it. And we think that my blessing takes away from your blessing, and your blessing takes away from his blessing. And if you keep having and being blessed by God, I'll be blessed less. That somehow there's only enough for so many. But if we've been to potluck, we know there's not only enough for so many. It just keeps pouring out. The miracle that Jesus has of feeding thousands with nothing is a miracle that the blessing continues to grow and to grow and to grow. And the more people partake of the blessing, the more blessing there is. See, it's exactly the opposite of our worldly vision. In our worldly vision, if you're blessed, I have less. But in God's, your blessing increases mine. Jesus says, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. But inherent in that message is I am the way, the truth, and the life. Everyone can come to the Father through me. Every one of us has the full blessing of God through Jesus, God's Son. See, my mother is still practicing Jew, and my father passed away as an atheist Muslim. But God had a blessing that he wanted to bestow on them through his Son, Jesus Christ. And that blessing he wanted to give equally to the Jewish woman and the Muslim father. And he bestowed it upon them. It is up to us whether we partake in that blessing and share it with those around us, or if we say, there's not enough. I'm just going to hold on to it myself. So I ask you today, when you look at the beads that God has in store, does he have enough beads for everybody you've ever met? Or does he only have enough beads for you? I'm telling you, he only has enough beads for you. You probably don't have his beads. But if you see enough beads there for absolutely everybody, that's the Jesus that wants to save you. That's the Jesus that died for every person. The Jesus that just keeps blessing.